Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we are diving into Kenyan politics.
Always a fascinating topic.
You know it. You guys sent us a YouTube video titled Suluuh Hassan Calls President Ruto a Liar in Front of Tanzanians from the David Wafula channel.
Oh, yeah, I saw that one.
And the title's pretty attention-grabbing, right?
Definitely is.
But one of the things that really stuck out to me is that it came out right when President Ruto is dealing with some pretty serious problems with his leadership.
Yeah, his approval ratings have been tanking lately.
Yeah.
And, that always leaves the door open for a lot more criticism and challenges.
Exactly. And this video kind of combines these seemingly unrelated things: honey, religion, and tribal politics. It's wild. So let's start with the honey.
Okay.
This video says that the Tanzanian President Suluuh Hassan straight up accused Ruto of basically yoinking Tanzanian honey and saying it's Kenyan.
Whoa.
It even suggests there were trucks involved in this whole honey heist.
Wow. What strikes me about this isn't whether it's actually true or not, who knows, but it's more about what it says about how Kenya and Tanzania are getting along.
Right.
They've got this long history of working together on the economy, but they've also had some beef, especially when it comes to borders and resources.
So you're saying even if this honey thing was just a joke, it could still mean there's some real tension underneath.
Exactly. It's like when a family gets together and someone makes a little comment that suddenly brings up all this old drama.
Oh, yeah.
On the surface, it's nothing, but it can expose some deep cracks.
And with Ruto already in a tough spot, even a hint of trouble with a neighbor like Tanzania could make things way worse, right?
Absolutely. People who don't like him in Kenya could use this to make him look even weaker, like he can't even handle things with the countries next door.
Like he can't be trusted.
Yeah, it makes him look unstable.
Okay, so then this video goes on to bash Ruto for donating 5 million Kenyan shillings to a church in Bungoma. They don't hold back, basically calling him a hypocrite. They even throw in a Bible verse, Matthew 6:2-4, to say he's all about looking holy instead of being truly generous.
And this is where things get really interesting. It shows just how powerful religion and politics are when they get mixed up in Kenya.
Totally. Religion is a huge part of Kenyan life, so politicians often use it to make themselves look good and get votes.
For sure.
So is this video just calling out hypocrisy, or are they being sneaky and using religious stuff to hurt Ruto's image with religious people?
It's probably a little bit of both. Kenyans have always looked at politicians through a religious lens, but it's also a classic move for the opposition. They try to plant seeds of doubt and say a leader isn't living up to their own moral standards.
And with Ruto's popularity tanking, that kind of attack could really hit home for people who are already questioning his leadership.
You got it. By saying he's a hypocrite, the video feeds into people's anxieties and makes it seem like Ruto's totally out of touch with everyday Kenyans.
Okay, so then the video takes a hard left into Kenyan tribal politics, which is always a tangled mess.
Oh boy.
It says that Ruto's lost the backing of the Luo tribe.
No way.
Which is a huge group of voters, and it even hints at this new, powerful three-way alliance popping up.
Oh.
The video's vague about who's in this alliance, but just the idea of it could shake things up big time.
Tribal allegiances are a huge deal in Kenyan elections. They've always determined who wins and who loses.
So we're talking about a potential power shift here, one that could really weaken Ruto and boost his rivals.
100%. To get what this alliance really means, we need to break down Kenyan tribal politics. It's complicated.
I'm all ears. This video is like a rabbit hole, and I bet our listeners are hooked too. So let's dig into this three-way alliance and see how much of a threat it could be to Ruto.
Sounds good. Let's do it. So Kenya has over 40 different ethnic groups, but the power has usually been with a few of the bigger tribes.
So when this video talks about a three-way alliance, it's saying 3 of those big tribes might be teaming up.
Exactly. And even though the video just uses these kind of cryptic terms like Mulembe Nation, the Mountain, and AA,
right,
we can make some pretty good guesses about who they're talking about based on what's going on in politics right now and who's been allied with who in the past.
Okay, so let's try to decode these terms. What exactly is the Mulembe Nation?
Mulembe Nation refers to a bunch of different ethnic groups, mostly in Western Kenya.
Okay.
And they've got a lot of voting power.
I see.
They haven't always supported the same party, but people often see them as the swing vote, the ones who can really change the outcome of an election.
Got it. And what about the Mountain? That sounds pretty epic.
The Mountain probably means the Kikuyu community.
Okay.
They're the biggest ethnic group in Kenya, and they've traditionally been associated with the area around Mount Kenya.
Oh.
They've always had a lot of power, both political and economic.
Okay, makes sense. And last but not least, AA. Any idea who that could be?
This one's a bit more vague, but it probably refers to the Kalenjin community.
Okay.
That's Ruto's own tribe. They've been his biggest supporters. So him losing favor with the Luo tribe and then this potential three-way alliance, it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this alliance could be a major problem for Ruto. It's got potentially huge voting power, plus a traditional rival, and it even suggests some cracks in his own base.
That's exactly why this claim, even without knowing all the details, is so important. It's like the ground is shifting under Kenya's political landscape. It could totally change who has power and have all sorts of consequences.
Before we get into those consequences, there's one line from the video that really stuck with me. That line, "This is a very treacherous country."
It's kind of scary, right? Like, it's saying Kenyan politics are really dangerous.
Yeah, that line definitely got my attention too. It makes you wonder how safe things really are in Kenya, especially with Ruto's popularity dropping and all these political alliances changing.
So you're saying it might not be an exaggeration?
It's tough to say for sure whether it represents how everyone feels, but Kenya does have a history of things getting out of hand politically, especially around elections.
Tensions between different ethnic groups can get really high, and there has been violence and unrest before.
So even if it's a bit dramatic, that statement might show how anxious and uncertain some Kenyans feel, especially with everything happening with Ruto.
Exactly. It shows how much is at stake in Kenyan politics and how quickly things could change. That's why it's so important to really understand tribal politics. The stakes are high, loyalties can shift fast, and nobody knows what's going to happen next.
You mentioned earlier that these alliances have always been the key to forming governments and winning elections in Kenya.
Right.
Can you explain that a bit more? What makes these alliances so important in Kenyan politics?
Well, one big factor is that they give groups access to power and resources.
Okay.
When different tribes team up, they get more support, which means they're more likely to win elections and control the government.
Makes sense.
And once they're in power, they can decide how resources are shared, like government jobs and development projects. And they usually favor their own people.
So it's not just about agreeing on ideas or political goals. It's also about getting power and all the good stuff that comes with it.
Exactly. And that can create a system where people are loyal to their tribe more than anything else, which can make things worse between different groups.
So this idea of Ruto losing the Luo tribe's support is even more worrying. If a group that usually supports a certain party or leader suddenly switches sides, it can mess everything up.
Totally. It's like shaking up the whole system. Suddenly, everyone has to rethink their strategies. Nobody's sure what's going to happen. And the whole idea of who has the power is up in the air.
It sounds like to understand this whole tribal politics thing, you need to know a lot about history, relationships, and power dynamics.
You got it.
Is there anything about this possible three-way alliance, the one the video calls Milembe Nation, the Mountain, and AA, that stands out to you? Like, is there anything that's especially important or could have a big impact?
The thing that I find really interesting is that AA, which we think is the Kalenjin community, is part of this alliance.
Right.
Like we said, that's Ruto's own tribe. They've always had his back. So for them to maybe join up with groups that have been rivals in the past, it's a sign that something's wrong.
So you're saying even his own people might be unhappy with him? Maybe because of the honey thing or because they think he's not genuine about helping people?
Exactly. It looks like his popularity going down and all the stuff in the video, like the honey controversy and the criticism of his donations, might be making people in his own community question if they should still support him.
That's a huge deal. If he can't even count on his own tribe, it makes you wonder if he can stay in charge.
It definitely does. It makes an already complicated situation even more messy.
Speaking of messy, let's go back to the honey thing for a minute. You said that even a little comment from President Suluuh Hassan could mess things up between Tanzania and Kenya. Where do you think we might see those effects?
Trade is one area to watch for sure. Tanzania and Kenya have been working together on trade for a long time, and they're each other's biggest trading partners in East Africa. But if their leaders aren't getting along, it could affect trade deals and business across the border.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
Sure, imagine Kenyan goods getting stuck at the border in Tanzania, or Tanzania putting new taxes on certain products. That would hurt both countries' economies, mess up supply chains, and make things more expensive for people.
So even a little change in how those two leaders get along could have a big impact on the economy.
Absolutely. And then there's the issue of regional security. Kenya and Tanzania work together to fight terrorism and crime across their borders.
So if they stop getting along, it could make the whole region less safe.
Exactly. They might share less information, stop working together on operations, and the whole security system could weaken.
Wow, it seems like this honey thing, even though it seemed like a small thing at first, could have a huge impact on the relationship between these two countries.
It definitely shows how important diplomacy is and how careful leaders have to be, especially in a place like East Africa where everything's connected.
This deep dive has really shown me how complicated and connected politics are in this region. We started with a YouTube video about honey, and now we're talking about potential problems between countries, the mix of religion and politics, and all the complexities of tribal alliances. It's amazing how these seemingly random things can come together to create a really tricky and maybe even dangerous situation.
It just goes to show that in politics, like in life, little things can have big consequences that you don't expect.
As we go to the last part of our deep dive, I'm really curious to explore what all this means for Kenya's political future. Can Ruto survive this, or is this the beginning of the end for him? And what does it mean for the rest of East Africa? I bet our listeners are dying to hear your thoughts on all this.
It's tough to say for sure. There's no doubt that Ruto's got a lot of problems. This stuff with Tanzania, people not trusting him, and this new tribal alliance. But Kenyan politics, you never know what's going to happen.
Right. It always keeps you guessing. So even with everything looking so bad for him, you're saying there's still a chance he could pull through.
Yeah, the next election isn't until 2027. So he's got some time to try and fix things. He could work on making things better with Tanzania, show people he's serious about poverty and inequality, and try to win back those who've lost faith in him.
So he's got to prove to Kenyans he's still the guy for the job.
Exactly. And that's not going to be easy. He needs a good plan to deal with all the criticism. He has to really understand what ordinary Kenyans are going through and offer real solutions. He's got to project that image of a capable and steady leader.
Okay, but even if he manages to get people back on his side in Kenya, what about this new tribal alliance? If they keep gaining power, couldn't they just kick him out in the next election?
Oh, absolutely. That's a real possibility. Like we
Yeah.
said, tribal allegiances are a huge deal in Kenyan elections. If those three groups stick together and present a united front, Ruto's going to have a tough time getting reelected.
So a lot depends on if this alliance can actually stay together and keep growing over the next few years.
Exactly. It's easy to form an alliance when everyone's angry or wants power. But turning that into a real political force that can win elections and run the country, that's a whole different ballgame.
And this isn't just about what's happening inside Kenya either. There's a whole regional situation to think about. We talked about the problems with Tanzania, but what about other countries in the area? Could they get involved?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Kenya's a big player in East Africa, both
Yeah.
politically and economically.
Right.
What happens there affects everyone around them. Any political trouble in Kenya could cause problems for the whole region.
So everyone's keeping a close eye on what's happening, and their actions could influence things in Kenya too.
You got it. Alliances and rivalries between countries can be really powerful. Some countries might not like Ruto and want to help his opponents, while others might try to help him stay in power because they benefit from him being there.
It's like trying to figure out a puzzle where all the pieces are constantly moving. It's almost impossible to predict what's going to happen with Kenyan politics.
That's a great way to put it. There are just so many things happening both inside and outside Kenya that it's really anyone's guess what the outcome will be.
So even though we can't see the future, what are some things we should be watching out for the next few years that could give us clues about what's going to happen?
Well, first, I'd say keep an eye on how Ruto reacts to all these challenges.
Yeah.
Does he listen to the criticism and try to change things? Or does he just keep doing what he's doing?
So is he willing to change, or is he too stubborn?
Exactly. Second, watch this new tribal alliance closely. Do they get stronger and gain more support, or do they fall apart because of disagreements? How united and organized they are will tell us a lot about whether they can actually challenge Ruto.
And lastly, we need to pay attention to what's happening in the region. Do other countries get involved to help or hurt Ruto, or do they just stay out of it?
Those are all really good things to watch for. What happens in Kenya is going to be decided by a mix of domestic politics, what's going on in the region, and the choices Ruto himself makes.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We started with a YouTube video about honey and ended talking about political power, tribal alliances, and the stability of a whole region. It really shows how even the smallest things can have huge consequences.
It does. It shows how connected our world is and how important it is to understand the things that shape events, even when they seem far away.
I'm leaving this deep dive feeling a mix of intrigue and uncertainty. Who knows what's going to happen in Kenyan politics, but that's what makes it so fascinating to watch. It reminds us that history is constantly changing and we're all a part of it in some way.
I completely agree. As we try to understand what's happening around us, it's so important to be curious, to think critically, and to question what we believe. That's how we can make sense of these complicated times and be more informed citizens.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kenyan politics. To all our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep learning about these issues, stay informed, and maybe even share your own thoughts and ideas. Until next time, keep exploring and embracing the complexities of our world.